To get started on this project, you should have already taken a variety of pictures using the Photo Booth app on your computer. When you use this app, make sure you're using the reflected filter so that everything you photograph is equal on both sides. And again, you should have a good variety of pictures to pick and choose from and to work from. The next thing we want to do is to crop these down and clean them up just a bit so that all we see is the black and white imagery, and get rid of any background images and any fingers that may be showing up in your picture. To do this, select an image and drag it into Photoshop. Make mine a little bit larger. Pick your crop tool, the regular crop tool, and make sure at the very top under the options that we're working in the ratio setting. We don't really care about the height or width for now, so you can clear all of that away. Then you can click and drag and bring in until it crops out most of your background. Once you're done, you can hit the checkbox to lock that in. If there's any other parts you need to remove, like I couldn't crop out the fingers without cropping out my picture, this is where you can grab your paintbrush tool and just paint over those areas with a black color. Again, doing it on this side as well. The last thing we need to do is to turn this into a true black and white picture. We don't want to have any gradations or different values of color on there. In your Adjustments panel, locate at the very bottom center the Threshold adjustment. The threshold allows you to take your black and white image and cut it out into just black, into just white. Usually you can adjust the amount of black and white, but for now we can keep it relatively in the middle and it should give you some good results. The last thing we need to do is to flatten our image. You can go to Image, to Layer, down to the very bottom and choose Flatten Image, and now you can see that it's flattened out. Finally, we can save this picture. We'll go to File and Save, say OK to the options, and you can close this out. Repeat this process for all of the different pictures that you have saved in the folder. Once you're finished, you should have an entire folder that looks like this. It's nothing but your reflected images just in black and white. The next thing we need to do is to vectorize all of our pictures in Illustrator. So I'm going to launch Adobe Illustrator. Let's go up to File and create a new document. Now the size of this document won't really matter because we can change it up later. But for now, we're going to keep it as a simple square. Make sure you're working in inches and set it to be 12 inches by 12 inches. Also, under the advanced settings, make sure you're working in RGB color mode. Also, my raster effects are high value, but that won't matter. We'll say Create. And finally, I'm going to zoom out so that I can see my artboard and all the area around it. We want to place all of those different photographs that we've cleaned up. So let's go to File and Place. And on the desktop, let's locate my mask studies. I'm going to do Command A to select all of them and say Place. Notice that each of them are going to follow my cursor till I click once, and you can see that they're all placed inside of here. This is why I like to zoom out, so I get a little bit of work room without having to fill up my entire artboard area. Now you may have more or less than me. As long as you have a good section to choose from, that's okay. And remember, when we create these shapes, we're not looking for a finalized mask. Instead, you may be looking for parts of a mask or parts that you can pick and choose from to create the different areas of your face on your mask. The next thing we need to do is to quickly vectorize each part of them. So we're going to repeat this process for everything. Select one of your images, in this case my first one, and choose Image Trace. Image Trace is going to look at the black and white areas of your photograph, and it will no longer be pixelated. Instead, it will have a high quality vector image. Once it's traced, you can click Expand, and this will break it apart so that we can see all of our individual lines and parts to it. Repeat this process for all of the different images. You do have to do it one at a time, clicking on Image Trace and then Expand. Illustrator won't let you select multiple images and then image trace them all at once. So take some time and go through each one at a time. Image trace and then expand. Alright, I've skipped ahead and gone ahead and expanded and image traced all of my pictures. Now I need to remove any of the black background that I don't want to keep. Keep in mind, all of my shapes that I do want to keep are white. If you were working on the opposite of this, if you had a whiteboard with black images, you may want to do the inverse of what I'm about to do. But we want to select just the black areas. I'm going to choose my white arrow selection tool and carefully click on the dark area. Notice that my fill color is now black. Now I can go up to Select, the same fill color, and it will select all the areas that have that same black fill color. Now all I have to do is hit the Delete key, and it will delete everything away. That's a quick and easy way of erasing away just the black parts. Now in my case, I also have these extra little stray lines that I need to go through and carefully select and delete away as well. So bear with me just a moment as I select those and get those. And there we have it. All of our images are now vectorized. They are grouped together, but I can click on them and move them around. The next thing we need to do is to give ourselves a black background in which to work. Let's open up our Layers menu. And I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call this my background layer. And I'm going to put it below layer 1. On my background layer, I'm going to choose my rectangle tool. And I'm going to set my fill color to be just a solid black. Then I'll make a black rectangle going all the way through my background. Once that's done, I can lock it down. And now's the fun part of building and seeing how these different shapes can work with each other. The first thing I want to do when setting up my document is to zoom in on my artboard. I've turned on my rulers, and I'm going to drag a vertical ruler, make sure to click on the ruler, vertical ruler right at the 6-inch mark. This is going to cut your paper in half, and this will act as a guideline so I can keep everything nice and symmetrical. Also, if you go up to View, down to Guides, make sure you've got your guides locked down. Right now I've got mine locked down because it says unlock, but this will keep me from moving that guide around and changing it up later on. Now I can zoom out and start to pick and choose different parts of my mask and how I want to build it out. You can start off with any part of it, and later on we can go back in and adjust how it looks. So if I like the way these eyes look, I'm going to make a copy of it onto my board. And when I place it on my board, I want to make sure that it snaps right there in the center of it. You can zoom in and nudge it over with your arrow keys if you want as well. Other parts like this I can bring in. We'll center that up too. I like the way that looks, but maybe I don't want to have this bottom portion. If you want to erase away something, there's two things you can do. You can use your white arrow selection tool and click on the part and delete it away. Or you could use your eraser tool. And the eraser tool works just like a regular brush eraser in Photoshop. You can select the object and click and drag on it. Just keep in mind, you want to have everything nice and symmetrical. So if you do something to one side, you may want to do it on the other side as well. Now let's go back and forth and build out our entire mask, taking one part at a time and taking away the parts that I don't want. A final thing you're going to see me do is to scale this down. Remember, there is no one particular size I'm looking for, so you can always make it larger or smaller to have everything fit onto your artboard. Now that I've got a rough shape added in for my mask, I can also start to think about color. I like to start off with black and white just to rough in these areas, but once I start to add color, I can also add things like the transparency modes that will allow me to blend these colors together. Here's what I mean. I'm going to open up my swatches library, and then down at the very bottom, let's choose some default libraries that we can add to this. You can choose whatever library you want to work with, but for me, I'm going to keep it within metals because I like to use these golds and silvers and midtones and kind of earthen tones for my mask. I can pick and choose the different parts of this and start to add the different colors to them. Now keep in mind, it's going to be a symmetrical design, so what you do to one side also needs to be done to the other sides. So very quickly, let's do a couple of these and see what they look like. The other thing is try to keep your color scheme relatively simple. I don't want to have 100 different colors or shades when I can easily keep that down to 3 or 4. So this is what you're seeing me do for all of these. Let's get several other things. Oops. 2. And then finally, maybe let's get rid of that in favor of this. Perfect. Okay. The other thing, now that I've got this done, I can select all of these, and let's set the transparency panel to have everything in screen mode. Whenever I choose screen, or if I wanted to, I could also use overlay. Well, overlay is going to get rid of it. Let's go back to screen and some of these lighter things. This will introduce the ability to see how these shapes overlap, and that's actually going to create some really fun, interesting, different shapes. I can continue to build on with this, changing up the colors as I go and seeing how they'll play with each other as I work through my design. So for instance, if I wanted to, I could choose something like, say this one has a good facial features to it. I like the eyes on this one. I'll bring those in. I'll position those down. Again, I can give them a color, and I can change their transparency mode to screen, and I can see how this blends in with other stuff. If I wanted to, I can drop their opacity and have them take up a little bit less shape. Maybe I'll make them a little bit more obvious for that. There we go. Again, bring in my transparency, set it to be a different color, and even lower the opacity just slightly. It adds some color to it, but it also doesn't overpower everything that's on here. The final thing I can do, if I feel like there are certain parts that I don't want to see any overlap, if I really want to see parts that will show through that don't blend with any of the shapes that are below it, this is where I can use my Shape Builder tool to do some final cleanup. For example, up here at the very top, I like the way these horn-like structures look, but I don't want them to blend with the object that's below them. So I'm going to select everything that's on my page, choose my Shape Builder tool, and with the Shape Builder, I can click and drag through these shapes and it'll turn it all into one solid shape. Let's do the same for this side. Click and drag and it will link all of these together. This will cut out what's in the background and keep everything nice and the same. Selecting all of these again, let's do the same for some of these other parts. So if I wanted, I'll choose my metal texture again. Again, let's choose this. Now I'll click and drag through and clean up any parts that I don't want to be blending together. Making sure they look nice and symmetrical. I love the way the eyes are turning out, but maybe I don't want all of these to blend together. So let's choose a different color. And we'll let all of these kind of come together as one solid piece. If you make a mistake, that's okay. Just undo and back up. And keep rolling with that. The other thing you can do is to just choose a regular or an off-the-wall kind of color and see how all those blend together. Sometimes it'll give you some results that are unexpected. Actually, I kind of like the look of how all of these are coming in. Let's undo that. All right. Once you've got your final vector mask created, the last thing we want to do is to add the shadows and filter effects in Photoshop to your mask. And that's really going to set off your mask and make it look full and complete. So with this done, we're going to go up to File and let's save this as our vector mask. Notice I'm saving it as an Illustrator file. That's fine. We can say OK. Then we can close it out and launch Photoshop. Now that we're in Adobe Photoshop, let's open up our Illustrator document. Go up to File, down to Open, and locate your Vector Mask Illustrator document. When we say Open, this will ask for how we want to import this. Make sure you're cropping this to the bounding box. We want to see everything that's just inside the artboard that you're working on. The other thing is the size of it needs to be about 12 by 12. If yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. And set your resolution to be something nice and high. I like to work at between 300 or 600 pixels per inch. Finally, make sure you're working in RGB color mode. We'll say OK. This will open up your document and have it nice and cropped to the bounding box. Before we move on, let's save this now as an Illustrator file. So we'll go to File and Save As. And this will be our final mask design. Make sure the Photoshop format is what you have selected, and we'll say Save and OK to that. Now let's add some interest to our design. Opening up our Layers panel, I'm going to expand it so we can see it. I'm going to make a new layer on top of Layer 1. I can then zoom into the part that we want to affect. I'm going to work on the top part up here. I'm going to choose my selection tool, in this case my Magic Wand selection tool. With the Magic Wand, make sure you're working in normal selection mode. I'm going to keep my tolerance relatively low, between 10 and 20 pixels or 10 and 20 tolerance. Also, since we're working on multiple layers, make sure Contiguous and Sample All Layers is checked on. It's very important that both of those are set up that way. We're on Layer 2 right now, and I'm going to click and hold down the Shift key to add on, if I need to select parts of the mask. In this case, I'm going to choose these 4 little parts up here. I want to add a gradation of color to those colors up there, and I'm going to do it within my Layers panel. So with that selected, and also my Layer 2 selected, I can choose my Gradient tool. If you don't see it, it's usually hiding underneath your Paint Bucket tool. With the Gradient tool, I can go up here to the very top, and I've got my foreground and background color selected. In my case, my foreground and background are both black, so let's choose a different color. I'm going to choose, let's say, a red for my foreground. Hitting X, I'll swap over and let's do something like do like a orange. Now when I click and drag, it'll create a gradient in whatever direction I have selected. This will add some color to what we have, but if I want it to blend in with the colors below it, let's change up our blending mode. Now I can set that to be multiply or even overlay, and you can see how that will add on that particular effect to that. Whoops, I accidentally hit the filter key. There we go. If I like that, I can do deselect, Command D, and that will deselect my selection. As long as the areas are selected, this will work really well for what you have done. Let's do it for this other part down here. Choose my magic wand, select the part that you want. If you want, you can add another layer, or you can just use your gradient tool and then click and drag and add the gradient inside of that. Because it has the same filter, it'll filter that way. Let's change up maybe a different color. A different color is going to give you, obviously, some different results. Oops. Command D will deselect it. Another thing you can do is to add a filter to your area. In my case, I'm going to go down to my eyes. I want to add kind of a striped effect to this one. Here's kind of a cool thing we're going to do. I'm going to make a new layer, choose my selection tool. I'm going to click and select all parts of this eye because I want to fill in the filter part just into this eye layer. We'll do the same. Oh, yeah. We'll just do it to this one eye first. Now I could choose my gradient tool and do like a simple black to white. So maybe I'll load up white and black. And if I click and drag, you can see it gives me this effect. Again, if I choose multiply, it'll blend it in this way. But I want to take it a step farther. Let's go back to normal view. Instead of it being just black and white, I'm going to go up to filter and let's choose from our filter gallery. Because I have this shape selected, everything is going to be applied within this area, and I can choose the different filters to play around with. In my case, the sketch filter also has a color halftone. With the halftone selected, I can play around with the style and the size of that tone, even the contrast of it. Doing this, I really like the circular one because it gives me this kind of effect as well. If I say OK, there is that effect. And again, I can choose multiply, and it will multiply that effect on top of what's already there. I can even choose something different style as well. Now this really shows up if you start to do different colors. Let's do a different color one on the other side. Again, choose your selection tool, select the area you want to affect. That little piece right up there too. And choose my gradient tool. Instead of doing black and white, maybe this time I want to go back to that red and yellow. I'll click and drag. This time let's do it going this way. In this case, we'll go back up to filter, down to our filter gallery. You can see the effect that it's given to me this time. I can change up the size of it or the contrast of it. Let's do something like that. We'll say OK, and you can see it gives me this effect. So it's definitely something to play around with just to see what would happen. I'm going to swap these both out. Let's see if I can apply that filter now. It'll give me something closer to that. Playing around with these different effects is part of the entire project. Eventually, you'll add these kinds of things to your overall project until you get the desired effect that you want for your design. I can deselect, back out. You can see how this will all come together. Once you're finished, all parts of your mask should have some sort of overall design to them. Save up your Photoshop document, and so that it has all the different layers to this. And this Photoshop document for this one design is what you're going to upload to Moodle once you're finished.